The dust-coated stagecoach rattled to a stop outside Langston's trading post as Lillian Turner clutched her worn leather satchel with trembling hands, knowing that today she would be sold to a man she'd never met to settle her late father's gambling debts. The year was 1876, and the unforgiving New Mexico Territory cared little for a 20-year-old woman with no family, no money, and nowhere to run. "End of the line, miss," the driver called, his voice carrying no sympathy as he opened the door. "Mr. Langston's expecting you." Lillian stepped down from the coach, her simple blue dress the last decent one she owned catching briefly on the splintered wooden step. The desert heat hit her like a physical force after the relative shade of the coach. Sweat immediately beaded along her hairline, dampening the blonde curls she'd so carefully pinned back that morning. The trading post loomed before her, a surprisingly large structure of weathered wood with a broad porch and several windows. A pair of men in dusty clothes lounged outside, eyeing her with undisguised interest. She lowered her gaze and hurried inside, the bell above the door announcing her arrival. "You must be James Turner's girl," said a heavyset man from behind the counter. His beard was streaked with gray, and a pair of spectacles perched on his bulbous nose. "Gilbert Langston, your father owed me a considerable sum before his unfortunate passing." Lillian straightened her back. "I understand my father's arrangement with you, Mr. Langston. I've come as promised." Langston's eyes raked over her appraisingly. "Good, I've already found a buyer, paid more than your father owed me, truth be told. You should be grateful he's a man of means, owns the largest cattle operation north of here." "His name?" Lillian asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Maxwell." "Silas Maxwell. Man hardly speaks, lost his wife some years back and turned inward. But he needs someone to keep his house and," Langston paused, his smile turning cruel, "warm his bed. You'll serve the purpose well enough." Lillian's stomach twisted with fear and disgust, but she had no choice. Her father's last act before drinking himself to death had been to sign her over to Langston to settle his debts. In this lawless territory, such arrangements were barely questioned. "When will he arrive?" "He's already here. Been waiting while I tend to some business. The paperwork's drawn up." Langston gestured toward a closed door at the back of the shop. "Through there." With legs that felt like lead, Lillian crossed the room. She paused at the door, taking one last deep breath of what felt like freedom, then turned the handle. The man who stood by the window was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a simple black coat despite the heat. His face was partially hidden by a well-trimmed dark beard streaked with silver. When he turned toward her, she was struck by the intensity of his eyes, a steely gray that revealed nothing as they swept over her. "Mr. Maxwell," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded once but said nothing. Langston bustled in behind her with papers in hand. "Sign here, Maxwell. She's all yours after that." He thrust a pen toward the silent man. Maxwell took the pen and signed with a firm hand, then placed several gold coins on the table, far more than Lillian would have guessed she was worth. "Your wagon's out back," Langston said, pocketing the money. "She's got one bag." Nothing more. Still silent, Maxwell nodded toward the door, clearly indicating that Lillian should follow him. With no other choice, she did, clutching her satchel to her chest like a shield. Outside, a wagon waited, hitched to two strong-looking horses. Maxwell gestured for her to climb up, then took his place beside her. Without a word, he flicked the reins and the horses began to move. As the trading post grew smaller behind them, Lillian felt tears threatening. She fought them back, determined not to break down in front of this stranger who now owned her. "Where are we going?" she finally asked when they'd traveled nearly an hour in silence. Maxwell reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small slate and piece of chalk. He wrote quickly, then handed it to her. "North, half-day's journey." The letters were neat and precise. "You don't speak at all?" she asked. He took back the slate, wiped it clean with his sleeve, and wrote again, "Not for years." The rest of the journey passed in silence. Maxwell didn't attempt further communication, and Lillian was too caught in her own thoughts to press him. The landscape rolled by harsh, beautiful in its way, with distant mountains and vast stretches of scrubland dotted with cattle. As the sun began to lower in the sky, they crested a hill and Lillian saw their destination. A sprawling ranch house stood in a small valley, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. It was larger and more impressive than she'd expected, built of stone and timber with a wide veranda wrapping around it. Several men were working in the yards, moving between the barns and corrals with purpose. They looked up as the wagon approached, their curiosity evident even at a distance. Maxwell drove directly to the house, stopping near the front steps. He climbed down and came around to Lillian's side, offering a hand to help her descend. His touch was impersonal but not rough, and he released her as soon as her feet touched the ground. The front door opened, and an older woman with iron-gray hair appeared. Her weathered face registered surprise at the sight of Lillian. "Mr. Maxwell?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight Spanish accent. "What's this?" Maxwell made a quick gesture with his hand's sign language. Lillian realized, but it was too fast for her to interpret. The woman's eyebrows rose. "A wife. You've brought home a wife." Lillian felt the blood drain from her face. "Wife, not servant or something worse." Maxwell nodded once firmly. "Well," the woman said, looking Lillian over with open curiosity. "I'm Rosa Mendez. I cook and keep house for Mr. Maxwell." She gestured for Lillian to come inside. Come, you must be tired from your journey." Lillian followed, acutely aware of Maxwell behind her. The interior of the house was surprisingly well-appointed, polished wooden floors, quality furniture, and signs of wealth that weren't ostentatious but unmistakable. "Did you marry on the road?" Rosa asked as she led them through to a sitting room. Before Lillian could answer, Maxwell made another series of hand gestures. "Ah, I see," Rosa said, though her expression suggested she didn't entirely approve. "Well, Miss Turner," Lillian supplied. "Lillian Turner? Miss Turner needs refreshment and rest, I'm sure." "I'll show her to your room, Mr. Maxwell, and bring up some water for washing." Maxwell nodded and turned away, heading back outside without a backward glance. Rosa led Lillian upstairs to a large bedroom dominated by a 4-poster bed. The room was clean and well kept, with a window overlooking the ranch and mountains beyond. "He hasn't shared this room with anyone since Mrs. Maxwell passed," Rosa said quietly. 7 years now." "I don't understand," Lillian said, setting her satchel down. "Mr. Langston said I was being sold to work here." Rosa's lips thinned. "That man, always making trouble." She shook her head. "Mr. Maxwell wrote to Langston months ago about finding a bride. He's not one for courtship, being as he doesn't speak, but the ranch needs a mistress. His son needs a mother." "Son?" Lillian felt increasingly bewildered. "No one mentioned a child. Benjamin, he's 10, currently staying with Mr. Maxwell's sister in Santa Fe for schooling. He'll return in 2 weeks' time." Rosa studied Lillian's face. "You truly didn't know?" "I knew nothing except that my father owed a debt and I was the payment." Lillian sank onto the edge of the bed. "I expected worse than this." Rosa patted her hand. "Mr. Maxwell is a good man, quiet not just because he doesn't speak, but in his manner he'll treat you well." "Why doesn't he speak?" Lillian asked. "That's not my story to tell," Rosa replied. "Rest now, I'll bring up some water and food. Tomorrow will be soon enough to learn the ways of this household." Left alone, Lillian opened her satchel and removed her few belongings: 2 more dresses, both well worn, some undergarments, a hairbrush, and a small book of poetry that had belonged to her mother. She placed them carefully in the empty dresser, feeling like an intruder. She moved to the window and gazed out at the ranch. In the distance, she could see Maxwell talking with several ranch hands. Even from here, his stance conveyed authority. The men nodded at whatever instructions he was giving, then dispersed to their tasks. As if sensing her gaze, Maxwell looked up toward the window. Their eyes met briefly before Lillian stepped back, her heart pounding inexplicably. This silent, imposing man was now her husband, at least in the eyes of others. What that truly meant remained to be seen. Later, after washing with the water Rosa brought up and eating a simple but delicious meal, Lillian sat in a chair by the window, watching as darkness fell over the ranch. The sound of boots on the stairs made her tense. A soft knock followed. "Come in," she called, rising to her feet. Maxwell entered carrying his slate. He'd removed his coat and wore just a white shirt and dark trousers. He wrote something and held it up. "You can have the bed, I'll sleep elsewhere tonight." Relief washed through her. "Thank you," he nodded, then wrote again. "We should talk tomorrow." "About arrangements." "Yes," she agreed. "That would be best." He hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry about your father and how you came here." The unexpected sympathy brought tears to her eyes. She blinked them away. "Thank you, Mr. Maxwell." He pointed to the slate where he'd written, "Silas." "Silas," she repeated softly. He gave another nod, then left, closing the door quietly behind him. Lillian lay awake for hours that night, trying to make sense of her situation. She'd been prepared for the worst, to be a servant or worse to a cruel master. Instead, she found herself the supposed wife of a man who wouldn't speak and seemed determined to treat her with at least basic decency. It was a far better outcome than she'd feared, yet still left her future uncertain. Tomorrow, she would learn what Silas Maxwell truly expected of her. For tonight, at least, she was safe. It was more than she'd dared hope for when she'd boarded that stagecoach. Morning brought the sounds of the ranch coming alive, voices calling, animals making noise, the general bustle of a working operation. Lillian dressed quickly in one of her worn dresses, wishing she had something better to wear for her first full day in this place. She found Rosa in the kitchen, kneading dough with strong, flour-dusted hands. "Good morning," the older woman greeted her. "Did you sleep well?" "As well as could be expected," Lillian answered honestly. "Where is Silas?" "Already out with the men. He rises before dawn always." Rosa gestured to a pot of coffee on the stove. "Help yourself, there's bread and preserves on the table." Lillian sat and poured herself coffee, adding a small spoonful of sugar from the bowl on the table. "Rosa, can you tell me more about this place, about what will be expected of me?" Rosa wiped her hands on her apron and sat across from Lillian. "The Circle M Ranch has been in the Maxwell family for 3 generations. It's one of the largest operations in this part of the territory, nearly 5,000 acres and over 2,000 head of cattle. Silas runs it with 8 full-time hands, plus extra help during roundup and branding." "And my role as his wife," Rosa raised an eyebrow. "I suppose that depends on what you both decide. Traditionally, the mistress of the house oversees the domestic matters, meals, supplies, household accounts. I've been handling much of it since his first wife died, but I'm getting old." "My hands ache in the winter now." "I can cook," Lillian offered. "And I kept house for my father after my mother died. I can learn whatever else is needed." Rosa nodded approvingly. "Good. Silas needs a partner, not a burden, and Benjamin needs a mother's influence." She hesitated, then added, "Silas is a private man. The not speaking it came after Helena died. Benjamin was just 3. The fever took her quickly, and something in Silas broke. He hasn't spoken a word since her burial." "That's terrible," Lillian murmured. "Yes. He communicates well enough with the slate and signs. He's taught most of us some basic ones, but it changed him. He was never talkative, but he had laughter in him once." Rosa's eyes took on a faraway look. "Perhaps you can bring some light back." Before Lillian could respond, the back door opened and Silas himself entered. He nodded to both women, then went to wash his hands at the basin. "I was just telling Miss Lillian about the ranch," Rosa said. Silas dried his hands, then pulled his slate from his pocket. "Show her around after breakfast," he wrote, showing it to Rosa. "Of course, if that's what you want, but wouldn't you prefer to do it yourself?" He considered this, then nodded slowly. He wrote again, "After I check the north pasture." Lillian ate her breakfast quietly while Silas stood by the window, drinking his coffee. The silence wasn't entirely uncomfortable, but it held a weight of unspoken questions. When they'd finished, Silas gestured for Lillian to follow him. Outside, he led her to a small stable adjacent to the main barn, where a gentle-looking bay mare stood in one of the stalls. "For me?" Lillian asked, surprised. Silas nodded, writing, "You'll need to ride here, can you?" "Yes," she said. "My mother taught me as a girl, though it's been some years." He nodded again, seemingly satisfied. He wrote, "We'll ride out after lunch. Rest now. New clothes in the wardrobe." With that, he turned and strode away toward the main barn, where several men were saddling horses. When Lillian returned to the bedroom, she found that the wardrobe now contained several dresses, all new and of good quality. There were also riding clothes, split skirts, and blouses designed for a woman on horseback. She ran her hand over the fabric, wondering when he'd arranged this. Had he been so certain she would stay? After changing into one of the new dresses, a simple but pretty blue calico that fit surprisingly well, Lillian explored the house. It was larger than it appeared from outside, with 6 bedrooms upstairs, a study, dining room, kitchen, and spacious living area downstairs. Everything was well maintained but had a distinctly masculine feel. Few feminine touches remained, though she noticed a portrait of a dark-haired woman hanging in the study. Helena, she presumed. At lunch, Silas returned with dust on his clothes and a tired look. He washed up, then joined Lillian at the table where Rosa had laid out a simple meal of cold chicken, bread, and fruit. "Is everything all right?" Lillian asked, noticing his furrowed brow. He pulled out his slate. "Cattle breaking through the north fence. Fixed now?" "I see." "Is that a common problem?" "Sometimes," he wrote. "Ready to ride after we eat," Lillian nodded. "I'll change into the riding clothes." His eyes showed a flicker of approval before returning to his meal. An hour later, they rode side by side away from the ranch house. Lillian was grateful for the gentle temperament of her horse, as her riding skills were indeed rusty. Silas kept a slow pace, occasionally pointing out features of the landscape or aspects of the ranch operation. They rode past grazing cattle, stopping once while Silas inspected a watering hole, testing its depth with a stick. At a high point overlooking much of the property, they dismounted. Silas pulled out his slate. "All this is Circle M land. From that ridge to the river and south to the line of cottonwoods." "It's beautiful," Lillian said, genuinely impressed by the vastness of it. "You've built something remarkable here." He shook his head and wrote, "My grandfather started it. My father expanded it. I maintain it for Benjamin." "Your son," Lillian said. "Rosa told me he's 10. Silas nodded, his expression softening at the mention of his son. He wrote, "Good boy, smart, talks enough for both of us." That drew a small smile from Lillian. "I look forward to meeting him." Silas studied her face for a moment, then wrote, "We should discuss our arrangement." Lillian steeled herself. "Yes, I think that's wise." "This isn't how I would have chosen to find a wife," he wrote, his chalk moving quickly, "but I need one for Benjamin, for the ranch." "You need a home and protection. I can provide both." "And what do you expect in return?" Lillian asked directly. "Companionship, help with the house and accounts, a mother for Benjamin." He paused, then added, "Nothing more unless you wish it." Lillian felt a surprising rush of gratitude. "That seems fair, but what will you tell people? Surely they'll expect." "That we're married," he wrote. "We are, by common law." Langston drew up papers. I signed. "You're Lillian Maxwell now, but what happens between us privately is our business. And Benjamin, what will you tell him?" Silas's expression grew more serious. "The truth, eventually, for now that I found you and brought you home to be his new mother. He's young enough not to question more." Lillian nodded, processing this information. "I can agree to those terms, Silas. I'll be a proper wife in public and help with the ranch and Benjamin. I'm grateful for your consideration in other matters." He gave her a long look, then wrote, "I'm not a monster. I don't want an unwilling woman in my bed. Maybe in time we'll find more between us. Maybe not. But you're safe here." The word safe resonated deeply with Lillian. Safety was something she hadn't felt since her mother died, leaving her at the mercy of her father's declining fortunes and increasing drunkenness. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded once, then gestured back toward their horses, indicating it was time to continue their tour of the property. As they rode back toward the ranch house, the sun beginning to lower in the sky, Lillian felt a curious sense of hope beginning to bloom. Her circumstances were far from ideal, sold to a man she didn't know, expected to be a mother to his child, but something about Silas Maxwell's quiet dignity and fairness struck her. He might never speak aloud, but his actions said more than many men's words. The following days fell into a pattern. Lillian rose early, joining Rosa in the kitchen to help prepare breakfast for the ranch hands who ate at a long table in a building near the bunkhouse. Silas took his meals at the main house, sometimes writing notes about ranch business, sometimes simply eating in companionable silence. During the days, Lillian began learning the household routines where supplies were kept, how accounts were managed, which vendors delivered goods to the ranch. Rosa proved an excellent teacher, patient but thorough. "You're catching on quick," the older woman commented on the fourth day as Lillian correctly tallied a column of figures in the household ledger. Helena struggled with the accounts, always mixing up numbers. "My father was a banker before he lost everything to gambling and drink," Lillian explained. "He taught me figures when I was young before." She trailed off, not wanting to revisit those memories. Rosa patted her hand. "The past is past, you're doing well here." Silas notices even if he doesn't say so. Lillian felt a small flush of pleasure at this. "He's been kind." "Kind, yes, but lonely," Rosa said, her voice dropping. 7 years is a long time to be alone, especially when you don't speak to ease the silence. That evening, as Lillian sat on the veranda watching the sunset, Silas joined her. He'd been out with the men most of the day, working cattle in the south pasture, and looked tired. Without writing anything, he simply sat in the chair beside hers, stretching his long legs out before him. After several minutes of silence, Lillian said, "Rosa's been teaching me the household systems. I think I'm getting the hang of it." He nodded, a faint smile crossing his lips. "The ranch is much larger than I realized at first," she continued, "and more complex. So many different aspects to manage." Silas pulled out his slate. "You're doing well, Rosa approves. That's not easy," Lillian smiled. "I like her, she's straightforward." "Like you," he wrote. "I suppose I am," Lillian agreed. "Life hasn't left much room for pretense." They sat in silence again, watching as the last light faded from the sky, stars beginning to emerge in the vast darkness above. It was a peaceful moment, and Lillian realized with some surprise that she felt genuinely relaxed in Silas's presence now. A rider appeared at the edge of the property, coming fast. Silas stood immediately, his posture alert. The rider, one of the ranch hands Lillian recognized as Jake, a man in his 30s with a weathered face, pulled up to the veranda. "Mr. Maxwell," he called, "trouble at the north line. Looks like rustlers hit us, took maybe 30 head. Sam and I found where they cut the fence." Silas nodded sharply, his expression hardening. He made several quick gestures that Jake seemed to understand. "Yes, sir, I'll gather the men." Jake tipped his hat to Lillian. "Madam." Then he wheeled his horse around and rode toward the bunkhouse. Silas turned to Lillian, quickly writing, "Must go, rustlers are a problem lately, don't wait up." "Be careful," she said, surprising herself with the genuine concern in her voice. He gave her a quick nod, then strode toward the barn. Within minutes, Lillian heard the sound of horses departing Silas and several men, she presumed, riding out into the night to track down the cattle thieves. She remained on the veranda for a while longer, a strange unease settling over her. Rosa joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. "Rustlers again?" the older woman asked, handing Lillian a cup. "Yes, Jake said they took about 30 head. Rosa clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Third time this month, getting bolder." She settled into the chair Silas had vacated. "Don't worry too much. Silas knows what he's doing, and the men are good with guns." "Guns?" Lillian felt a spike of alarm. "You think there will be shooting?" "Depends on if they catch up to the thieves," Rosa said matter-of-factly. "Cattle rustling is hanging business in these parts. Men don't give up easy when their necks are on the line." Lillian clutched her teacup tighter. "I didn't realize." Rosa studied her face. "You're worried for him. Good, he needs someone to worry." "I hardly know him," Lillian protested weakly. "You know enough," Rosa replied with a knowing look. "He's a good man, strong, fair, doesn't speak with his mouth but says plenty with his actions. Not a bad foundation to build on." Lillian didn't respond, but Rosa's words stayed with her as she eventually retired to bed. The room felt especially empty knowing Silas was out facing potential danger. She'd continued to sleep alone. Silas had taken up residence in one of the other bedrooms without discussion, but knowing he was under the same roof had become a strange comfort. She slept fitfully, waking at every sound, wondering if it was Silas returning. Dawn was breaking when she finally heard horses approaching. She rose quickly, pulling on a robe over her nightgown, and hurried downstairs. Silas entered through the kitchen door, looking exhausted. His clothes were dusty, and there was a smear of what looked like blood on his sleeve. He stopped short when he saw Lillian, surprise evident in his eyes. "Are you hurt?" she asked immediately, moving toward him. He shook his head, pulling out his slate. "Not my blood, one of the rustlers. You caught them?" He nodded grimly. "3 men, 2 in custody now, 1 resisted." He didn't elaborate, but his expression told Lillian enough. "Did you recover the cattle?" she asked. "Most. Lost 7. He set down the slate and moved to the wash basin, splashing water on his face and hands, washing away the dust and blood. Lillian busied herself making coffee, giving him space while staying present. When she handed him a steaming cup, their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. "You should rest," she said. "You've been up all night." He nodded tiredly, writing, "Few hours." "Then work. The ranch won't fall apart if you sleep until noon," Lillian said firmly. "I'll tell the men you'll be out later." A flicker of amusement crossed his face, and he wrote, "Giving orders already? Someone needs to be sensible," she replied with a small smile. "Go to bed, Silas. I'll wake you for lunch." To her surprise, he complied, finishing his coffee and heading upstairs without further argument. Lillian went out to relay his instructions to the ranch foreman, a competent man named Tom who seemed to take the change of plans in stride. "About time someone got him to rest proper," Tom commented. "Man works harder than any 2 of us combined." The rest of the morning, Lillian found herself checking the stairs periodically, listening for any sound of Silas stirring. Her concern surprised her. She barely knew this silent man, yet the thought of him injured or in danger had kept her awake all night. Rosa noticed her distraction. "He's fine," she said as they prepared lunch together. "Been through worse than some rustler trouble." "Has he?" Lillian asked, unable to hide her curiosity. "Oh yes. Before you came, about 2 years back, he got caught in a flash flood while checking cattle in the low country, washed downstream nearly a mile, broke his arm and 2 ribs, crawled back to his horse somehow and rode home." Rosa shook her head at the memory. "Man's tougher than old leather." Lillian tried to imagine it, Silas injured and alone, fighting against nature itself, unable even to call for help. At noon, she went upstairs to wake him as promised. She knocked softly on his door, and when there was no response, she cautiously opened it. Silas lay on his side on the bed, still fully dressed except for his boots. His breathing was deep, and even his face relaxed in sleep in a way she'd never seen before. The perpetual tension in his features had eased, making him look younger, less burdened. Lillian stood watching him for a moment, struck by a sudden surge of protectiveness. This man who carried so much responsibility, who endured his private silence while managing a massive operation and raising a son, deserved a few hours of peaceful rest. She closed the door quietly and returned downstairs. "Let him sleep," she told Rosa. "We'll keep his lunch warm." It was mid-afternoon when Silas finally appeared, looking refreshed though slightly disoriented. He found Lillian in the study, reviewing the ledgers. "You should have woken me," he wrote on his slate. "You needed the rest," she replied simply. He studied her for a moment, then wrote, "Thank you." "You're welcome. There's food in the kitchen." Rosa kept it warm. After he'd eaten, Silas spent the remainder of the day catching up on ranch business, occasionally consulting Lillian on household matters. Their interactions had an easy quality that surprised her, as if they'd established a rhythm together in just these few days. That evening, a wagon arrived carrying a visitor, Dr. Lawrence, the local physician who made regular rounds to the outlying ranches. He was an older man with white hair and spectacles, his manner brisk but friendly. "Heard about your trouble with rustlers," he said to Silas after introductions were made. "Came by to check if anyone needed patching up." Silas shook his head, making a few signs that the doctor seemed to understand. "Good, good. And who's this lovely young lady?" Dr. Lawrence turned his attention to Lillian. "I'm Lillian Maxwell," she said, the surname still feeling strange on her tongue. The doctor's eyebrows rose. "Maxwell. Well now, that's news indeed." He looked between Lillian and Silas. "When did this happen?" Silas quickly wrote on his slate. "Last week, private arrangement." I see. The doctor's eyes twinkled with interest. "Well, congratulations to you both." About time you had a woman's touch around here again, Silas. Lillian felt her cheeks warm at being so easily accepted as Silas's wife. The doctor stayed for dinner, chatting amiably about local news and dispensing medical advice. He was clearly an old friend of the family, speaking of Benjamin with fondness and treating Silas's silence as unremarkable. After he'd gone, Lillian and Silas sat on the veranda again, watching the stars emerge. The night was cool and Lillian had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. "Doctor. Lawrence seems nice," she commented. "He didn't seem surprised that you'd suddenly acquired a wife," Silas wrote. "People have been pushing me to remarry for years. He's probably relieved. And what about your son? How do you think he'll react to suddenly having a stepmother?" Silas considered this, tapping the chalk against his slate before writing. "Benjamin is adaptable, curious about everything. He'll have questions, but he's been asking for a mother for years." "That's a lot of expectation to live up to," Lillian said quietly. Silas touched her arm lightly, drawing her attention to his slate. "Just be yourself. He'll love you for that." The simple confidence in those written words made something tighten in Lillian's chest. She looked away, suddenly overwhelmed by the situation, a husband who wasn't truly a husband, a child she'd never met who wanted a mother, and her own confused feelings about this silent, thoughtful man. The days passed quickly as Lillian settled into life at the Circle M. She took over more of the household management, freeing Rosa to focus on cooking, which the older woman preferred. Silas spent most days working with the cattle or handling ranch business, but always made time to explain aspects of the operation to Lillian when she asked. Their evenings often found them sharing the veranda or sitting in the study, sometimes with Silas writing notes about his day or future plans for the ranch, sometimes simply existing in comfortable silence. Lillian had begun reading aloud occasionally books from Silas's surprisingly extensive library, and he seemed to enjoy the sound of her voice filling the quiet house. A letter arrived from Benjamin, addressed to his father but with a postscript for "my new mother" that made Lillian's eyes sting with unexpected tears. The boy's handwriting was neat for his age, his enthusiasm palpable even on paper as he expressed his excitement about meeting her. "He sounds wonderful," Lillian told Silas that night. Silas nodded, his eyes warm with pride. He wrote, "He's the best part of me." The night before Benjamin was due to arrive, Lillian found herself uncharacteristically nervous. She checked his room 3 times to ensure everything was perfect, then paced the veranda until Silas came looking for her. He tilted his head questioningly, then wrote, "Worried about tomorrow?" "What if he doesn't like me?" Lillian blurted out. "What if I'm not what he expected?" Silas's expression softened. He wrote carefully, "Benjamin will adore you because you are kind and genuine." Just as he stopped writing suddenly, erased the last 2 words and continued, "Just be yourself." Lillian wondered what he'd been about to write, but didn't press. Instead, she admitted, "I've never been around children much. I don't know how to be a mother." "Neither did Helena at first," he wrote. "You learned together." After a pause, he added, "You're overthinking." That drew a small laugh from her. "Probably, it's a habit of mine." Silas smiled, a real smile that transformed his solemn face, and wrote, "A habit I've noticed." The next day, Silas rode out early to meet the stagecoach in town and bring Benjamin home. Lillian spent the morning helping Rosa prepare special dishes for the boy's return, then changed into one of her nicer dresses, a sage green that Rosa said brought out the color in her eyes. When she heard horses approaching, Lillian moved to the veranda, smoothing her skirts nervously. Silas rode up first, followed by a smaller figure on a pony. Benjamin, the boy who slid from his saddle, was tall for 10, with his father's strong features but softer somehow, his dark hair falling across his forehead. He looked up at the house, spotted Lillian, and broke into a wide grin. "Is that her, Pa? Is that my new mother?" His voice carried clearly, vibrant with excitement. Silas nodded, and Benjamin bounded up the steps with the limitless energy of youth. "Hello, I'm Benjamin Maxwell." He stopped just short of Lillian, suddenly shy despite his initial enthusiasm. "Are you really my mother now?" Lillian knelt to meet him at eye level. "Hello, Benjamin, I'm Lillian, and yes, I'm married to your father, which makes me your stepmother." She smiled warmly. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." Benjamin studied her face carefully, then declared, "You're pretty, prettier than in my imagining." A surprised laugh escaped Lillian. "Thank you, that's very kind." "Do you know how to make honey cakes? My aunt makes them, but they're not very good, too dry," he confided. "I don't know that recipe, but perhaps you could help me learn it," Lillian suggested. This seemed to be the right answer, for Benjamin beamed. "I'd like that, I'm a good helper. Pa says so." Silas had reached the veranda by then, watching the interaction with evident relief in his eyes. "Did you have a good journey?" Lillian asked Benjamin. "Oh yes, we saw a deer and her fawn by the creek, and Pa let me drive the wagon part way, and we stopped at Mr. Thompson's store where I got candy," and he broke off, looking at his father. "Sorry, Pa, I'm talking too fast again." Silas shook his head, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "Pa doesn't mind my talking," Benjamin explained to Lillian. "He says it makes up for his not talking. Do you mind it?" "Not at all," Lillian assured him. "I love hearing about your adventures." That was all the encouragement Benjamin needed. Throughout lunch, he regaled Lillian with stories from his school in Santa Fe, his friends there, and his plans for the summer at the ranch. Silas watched them, occasionally writing notes to answer Benjamin's questions or clarify a point, but mostly letting his son carry the conversation. After the meal, Benjamin insisted on showing Lillian his favorite spots around the ranch: the old oak tree he liked to climb, the small pond where frogs gathered in the evenings, the special hiding place in the barn loft. Silas accompanied them for part of the tour before being called away by the foreman to deal with some ranch matter. "Pa works really hard," Benjamin commented as they watched Silas stride toward the corrals. "Too hard sometimes. Aunt Margaret says he needs to rest more." "I think she's right," Lillian agreed. "He's been happier in his letters since you came," the boy said, his perceptiveness surprising Lillian. "He uses more words when he writes to me now." "Does he?" Lillian felt oddly pleased by this observation. Benjamin nodded seriously. "Before, his letters were short, just facts. Now he tells me things about the ranch and about you. He said you read books aloud and that your voice makes the house feel warm again." Lillian's heart skipped a beat. "He wrote that?" "Uh-huh." Benjamin looked up at her with his father's gray eyes. "Our house hasn't been warm since my first mother died. I don't really remember her, but Pa says she loved me very much." "I'm sure she did," Lillian said gently. "Will you love me too?" Benjamin asked, the question startlingly direct in the way only children can manage. Lillian knelt before him, meeting his earnest gaze. "Benjamin, I think I already do. You're a wonderful boy, and I'm very lucky to be your stepmother." Benjamin considered this, then nodded, apparently satisfied. "Good, I think I love you too. You're easy to love." With that settled in his mind, he grabbed her hand. "Come see my tree house. Pa built it last summer." That night, after Benjamin was tucked into bed, insisting that both Lillian and his father hear his prayers, Lillian and Silas retreated to the veranda. The night was warm and fireflies flickered in the darkness beyond the house. "He's amazing," Lillian said softly. "You've raised him beautifully." Silas ducked his head slightly, but she could see the pride in his eyes. He wrote, "He likes you, already attached." "The feeling is mutual," Lillian admitted. "He's so open and genuine, reminds me of how children should be, how I might have been in a different life." Silas looked at her questioningly. "My father wasn't always, as he was at the end," she explained. "When my mother was alive, he was different. Kinder, her death changed him like." She trailed off, realizing the parallel she'd nearly drawn. Silas finished the thought on his slate, "Like Helena's death changed me." "Yes," Lillian acknowledged. "Though in different ways," he nodded, then wrote, "Grief transforms. Some become hard, some hollow, some stop speaking." It was the most direct reference he'd made to his silence. Lillian ventured carefully, "May I ask why you stopped speaking?" Silas stared out into the darkness for a long moment. Then he wrote slowly, "Words failed. Helena dying, nothing I could say mattered, so I stopped trying." "But you communicate in other ways," Lillian pointed out, "with writing, with signs." "Necessity," he wrote, "for Benjamin, for the ranch. Do you think you'll ever speak again?" His hand hovered over the slate, then wrote simply, "Don't know." They sat in silence for a while, Lillian absorbing what he'd shared. Finally, she said, "Thank you for telling me." He nodded, then wrote something that surprised her. "Thank you for asking, most don't anymore." The following weeks brought a new rhythm to life at the Circle. Benjamin's presence filled the house with energy and sound, his constant chatter and laughter a counterpoint to his father's silence. Lillian found herself settling into the role of stepmother with surprising ease, helping Benjamin with his summer studies, teaching him to bake, and listening to his endless stories. Silas watched their growing bond with evident satisfaction. He spent more time at the house now that Benjamin was home, adjusting his work schedule to have meals with them and often joining their activities in the evenings. One night, after Benjamin had gone to bed, Lillian found Silas in his study reviewing accounts. She brought him a cup of coffee and sat in the chair opposite his desk. "Benjamin mentioned something about a summer festival in town next week," she said. "He seems very excited about it." Silas nodded, writing, "Annual celebration, games, food, dancing. Benjamin looks forward to it every year." "He wants us all to go together," Lillian said. As a family, something flickered in Silas's eyes, uncertainty perhaps. He wrote, "People will expect us to act as husband and wife." "We've been presenting that way to visitors here," Lillian pointed out. "Is it different in town? More eyes?" "More expectations." He hesitated, then added, "Might be uncomfortable for you." Lillian considered this. "I think I can manage for Benjamin's sake." Silas studied her face, then wrote, "For Benjamin, yes." The day of the festival dawned bright and clear. Benjamin was up at first light, too excited to sleep. By mid-morning, they were in the wagon heading to town, a place called Willow Creek that Lillian had not yet visited. It was larger than she'd expected, with a main street lined with businesses, a church with a white steeple, and a large open area where the festival was set up. Colorful bunting hung between buildings, and the sounds of a small band playing filled the air. People noticed their arrival immediately. Silas Maxwell was clearly an important figure in the community, and the sight of him with a young woman and Benjamin drew attention. Lillian felt the weight of curious stares as Silas helped her down from the wagon. "Mrs. Maxwell, I presume." A woman with gray streaked hair approached, her smile friendly but her eyes assessing. "I'm Martha Collins, wife of the town banker. We've all been curious about Silas's mysterious bride." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Collins," Lillian replied, keeping her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'm Lillian. And how are you finding ranch life? I understand you're from back east originally." Before Lillian could answer, Benjamin piped up. "She's wonderful. She's teaching me to bake honey cakes, and she reads the best stories, and she can ride almost as good as Pa now, Mrs." Collins laughed. "Well, that's quite an endorsement, young man." She looked between Lillian and Silas. "It's good to see Silas with a wife again. The house has been too quiet these past years." There was a knowing look in her eyes that made Lillian wonder how much the woman had guessed about their arrangement. Throughout the day, Lillian met what felt like the entire population of Willow Creek. Most were welcoming, though some of the women studied her with barely concealed curiosity or, in a few cases, resentment. Lillian gathered that Silas, despite his silence, had been considered quite a catch among the local families with marriageable daughters. Benjamin dragged them from one attraction to another, games of skill, where Silas won him a carved wooden horse. Food stalls where they sampled everything from apple pie to barbecued beef, and a display of horsemanship that left the boy wide-eyed with admiration. As evening approached, lanterns were lit around a cleared space for dancing. The small band struck up a lively tune and couples began to form. "Are you and Pa going to dance?" Benjamin asked, looking up at Lillian hopefully. Lillian glanced at Silas, unsure. He met her eyes, then held out his hand in invitation. "I'd be honored," she said softly, placing her hand in his. Silas led her to the dance floor with surprising grace for such a tall man. His hand at her waist was warm and steady as he guided her into the steps of a simple waltz. They had never been this close before, and Lillian was acutely aware of his strength, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. They moved well together, finding a rhythm without words. Lillian could feel the eyes of the townspeople on them, but found she didn't mind. There was something genuine in this moment, a connection forming between them that transcended their unusual circumstances. As they circled the dance floor, Silas bent his head slightly, bringing his face closer to hers. For a breathless moment, Lillian thought he might try to speak. Instead, he simply held her gaze, his eyes communicating something that needed no words. Later, as they drove home under a canopy of stars, Benjamin fell asleep in the back of the wagon, exhausted from the day's excitement. Lillian sat beside Silas on the driver's seat, a comfortable silence between them. "Thank you for today," she said quietly. It meant a lot to Benjamin. Silas took one hand from the reins and reached for hers, squeezing it gently before returning to guiding the horses. The gesture, simple as it was, felt significant in acknowledgement of something shifting between them. Summer progressed, bringing hot days and warm nights. Life at the Circle M fell into pleasant patterns. Benjamin thrived under Lillian's care, his natural exuberance tempered by the gentle guidance she provided. Silas continued to run the ranch with quiet efficiency, but now spent more evenings with his family, sometimes teaching Benjamin ranch skills, other times simply enjoying their company. Lillian found herself watching Silas when he wasn't aware, noting the gentleness in his hands when he worked with young animals, the patience he showed with Benjamin, the intelligence in his eyes as he managed the complex operation of the ranch. She was beginning to see the man beneath the silence, and what she saw increasingly drew her. One evening, as they sat on the veranda while Benjamin played nearby with a puppy he'd adopted from a recent litter, Silas wrote something on his slate that caught Lillian by surprise. "You've brought life back to this home." "Benjamin does that," she responded, deflecting the compliment. Silas shook his head and wrote, "Benjamin has always been full of life, but the house was still empty. You filled it." Lillian felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "I'm glad to be here," she said honestly. "When I boarded that stagecoach, I never imagined." She trailed off, not sure how to express the turn her life had taken. "Regrets," Silas wrote, his expression guarded. "No," she said firmly. "No regrets." After a moment's hesitation, she added softly, "I was sold to a man who never spoke, but I've found more understanding with you than with anyone who filled my ears with empty words." Something flickered in Silas's eyes, an emotion Lillian couldn't quite identify. Before he could respond, Benjamin called them to see a trick he'd taught the puppy, and the moment passed. That night, Lillian lay awake longer than usual, thinking about the family she'd unexpectedly found. Benjamin had worked his way into her heart with ease, his openness and affection irresistible. And Silas, her feelings for him had grown more complicated than she'd anticipated. What had begun as gratitude had evolved into respect, then friendship, and now something more, something she was hesitant to name. A sudden commotion outside broke into her thoughts, voices shouting, horses moving quickly. She rose and went to the window, trying to see what was happening in the moonlit yard. Men were mounting up, moving with urgency. She pulled on a robe and hurried downstairs. Silas was in the hall, buckling on a gun belt. His face was grim as he saw her. "What's happening?" she asked. He wrote quickly, "Fire, East Range, must go." "Is it bad?" He nodded. "Lightning strike, dry conditions, spreading fast." "Be careful," she said, touching his arm instinctively. He covered her hand with his briefly, then was gone, striding out to where a horse waited. Lillian stayed up, too anxious to return to bed. Rosa joined her after a while, her face lined with worry. "Happens every summer," the older woman said. "Lightning fires. This one sounds bad from what the men were saying." From the highest window in the house, they could see a distant orange glow on the horizon. Lillian thought of Silas and the men riding toward that danger and felt sick with worry. Benjamin appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Where's Pa?" Lillian went to him, putting an arm around his shoulders. "There's a fire on the range. He's gone with the men to fight it." Benjamin nodded, accepting this as part of ranch life. "He'll be okay. Pa's good at everything." "I'm sure you're right," Lillian said, wishing she felt as confident as the boy sounded. "But it's late. You should go back to bed." "Can I stay up with you instead?" he asked. "Just for a little while." Lillian couldn't refuse him. They sat together on the window seat, Benjamin eventually falling asleep against her side while she kept vigil, watching the distant fire and praying for Silas's safety. Dawn was breaking when horses finally approached the house. Lillian, who had dozed off briefly, jerked awake at the sound. She gently moved Benjamin, who had been put to bed by Rosa hours earlier, and hurried downstairs. Silas dismounted wearily, his face and clothes blackened with soot, his eyes red from smoke. Relief flooded through Lillian at the sight of him, exhausted but whole. "Are you hurt?" she asked, scanning him for injuries. He shook his head, too tired even to reach for his slate. "Is everyone safe? The fire?" He made a rocking motion with his hand, so then pointed to the house, clearly indicating he'd explain after he'd cleaned up. Lillian hurried to heat water while Silas stripped off his ruined shirt in the kitchen. His back was criss-crossed with old scars she hadn't seen before and fresh scratches from the night's work. Without thinking, she dampened a cloth and began to gently clean the soot and dirt from his skin. Silas went still at her touch, then gradually relaxed as she worked. When he turned to face her, their eyes met and held. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition of boundaries crossed, of care given and accepted. After he'd bathed and changed, Silas wrote a full account of the night's events. The fire had been contained before it could reach any structures or threaten the main herd, but they'd lost about 50 acres of grazing land, and one man had suffered burns to his hands. The injured ranch hand was at the doctor's house in town, expected to recover fully. "You should rest," Lillian told him. "You've been up all night." Silas nodded tiredly, but first wrote, "Thank you for caring for Benjamin, for waiting up." "Of course," she said. "We were worried about you." A small smile touched his lips at the "we," and he wrote, "Having you here makes coming home matter more." The words, simple as they were, made Lillian's heart quicken. Before she could respond, he rose and headed upstairs to sleep, leaving her to ponder their changing relationship. Late summer brought the busiest time at the ranch, cattle being moved, prepared for the fall drive to market. Silas was often gone from dawn to dusk, working with the men to ensure everything ran smoothly. Benjamin, eager to learn ranch operations, began accompanying his father on appropriate tasks, proud to be treated more like a young man than a child. Lillian found herself with more responsibility as well, managing household matters completely on her own now that Rosa had gone to visit her daughter for 2 weeks. She surprised herself with how capably she handled everything, ordering supplies, managing accounts, overseeing meals, and keeping the house running efficiently. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table reviewing accounts, Silas came in from a long day on the range. He watched her work for a moment before writing, "You look at home here." She looked up with a smile. "I feel at home, more than I expected to." He nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. After washing up, he sat across from her and wrote, "Benjamin wants to participate in the fall drive." "The cattle drive to market?" Lillian asked, surprised. "Isn't he too young?" "For the full drive, yes," Silas wrote. "But he could join for the first day, ride with me, important experience for him." Lillian considered this. "If you think it's safe, he'd be thrilled, I'm sure." Silas hesitated, then wrote, "Would you come too? First day only, camp overnight, return next day." This was unexpected. "Me, on a cattle drive, just to the first camp, 10 miles south, good trail," he added. "Family time before I'm gone 3 weeks." The thought of Silas being away for so long gave Lillian a pang she hadn't anticipated. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that, if you're sure I won't be in the way." He shook his head firmly, writing, "Never in the way, want you there." The simple statement warmed her more than it should have. The day of the cattle drive's start arrived with perfect weather, clear skies and mild temperatures. Benjamin was up before dawn, too excited to sleep. Lillian had packed supplies for their overnight stay and dressed in the practical riding clothes Silas had provided. The yard was filled with activity, ranch hands preparing horses, checking equipment, receiving last-minute instructions from the foreman. The cattle, nearly 1,000 head, were gathered in the south pasture, ready to begin the journey. Silas approached Lillian with a horse saddled for her, not her usual gentle mare, but a more spirited bay gelding. "This isn't my horse," she said, uncertain. He wrote quickly, "Need a stronger mount for the drive. This is Copper, reliable but with more stamina. He'll follow my lead." Lillian trusted Silas's judgment but felt a flutter of nervousness as she mounted the larger horse. The animal shifted under her, sensing a new rider but settled quickly when Silas stroked its neck. Benjamin rode up on his pony, practically bouncing with excitement. "We're ready, Pa." "Can we go now?" Silas nodded, making a hand signal to the foreman. The men began to move, pushing the cattle into motion. The drive had begun. The first hour was chaotic to Lillian's inexperienced eyes, dust rising, cattle bawling, horses and men in constant motion. Gradually, things settled into a rhythm. Silas kept her and Benjamin riding near the front, away from the thickest dust but close enough to observe the operation. "This is the best day ever," Benjamin declared, his face glowing with pride at being included in such important ranch work. Lillian had to admit there was something exhilarating about being part of this quintessential Western experience. She watched Silas directing men with hand signals and occasional notes, his authority absolute despite his silence. In this element, he was magnificent, confident, capable, completely in command. By late afternoon, they reached the campsite, a flat area near a stream with good grazing for the cattle. The men quickly established camp, setting up cooking fires and organizing watches. Benjamin eagerly helped where he could, proud to be treated as one of the crew. After a hearty dinner of beans, beef, and sourdough bread cooked over the campfire, most of the men settled in to rest before their watch shifts. Benjamin fell asleep almost immediately, worn out by the day's excitement. Lillian sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket against the evening chill. Silas joined her, offering a cup of coffee. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance. "Thank you for including us today," Lillian said softly. "It meant everything to Benjamin." Silas nodded, writing by firelight. "Good for him to learn. Ranch will be his someday." "He'll make you proud," Lillian said. "He already does." Silas looked at her across the fire, his eyes reflecting the flames. He wrote slowly, "Having you here means more than I can write." Lillian felt her heart quicken. "Silas." He moved to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. He wrote again, "When I return from the drive, we should talk about our arrangement." A flutter of uncertainty went through her. "Is something wrong?" He shook his head quickly, then wrote, "Not wrong, but changing, at least for me." "For me too," she admitted softly. His hand found hers in the firelight, fingers intertwining. They sat like that, not speaking, not needing to, as the stars appeared above and the sounds of the cattle drive surrounded them. The next morning, after breakfast, it was time for Lillian and Benjamin to return to the ranch while Silas and the men continued the drive. Benjamin hugged his father tightly. "I'll take care of everything while you're gone, Pa," he promised solemnly. Silas nodded, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. He turned to Lillian, his eyes saying what his voice could not. He took her hand briefly, then reached into his pocket and pressed something into her palm, a small carved wooden heart, simple but beautifully made. "Did you make this?" she asked, touched by the gesture. He nodded, a faint flush visible beneath his tan. "I'll treasure it," she said softly. "Be safe, Silas. Come home to us." He held her gaze for a long moment, then turned to mount his horse. With a final wave, he rode off to join the men already moving the herd, leaving Lillian holding the wooden heart and watching until he disappeared from sight. The 3 weeks of Silas's absence stretched endlessly for Lillian. She kept busy managing the ranch house, helping Benjamin with his studies, and handling the day-to-day matters that continued in the owner's absence. The remaining hands respected her authority, coming to her with questions about supplies or issues that needed decisions. Benjamin missed his father terribly but threw himself into the responsibilities. Silas had left him caring for his pony, checking the chicken coop daily, and helping around the house. Each night, he and Lillian would mark another day off the calendar, counting down to Silas's return. "Do you think Pa misses us?" Benjamin asked one evening as they sat on the veranda. "I'm certain of it," Lillian replied. "I imagine he thinks of us every day." Benjamin nodded, satisfied with this answer. After a moment he said, "I'm glad he found you. The house feels right with you here." Thank you, Benjamin, that means a great deal to me. Are you going to stay forever? He asked, the question catching her off guard. Lillian hesitated. I hope so. Would you like that, more than anything? The boy said fervently. Pa would too. He looks at you the way he looks at the sunset sometimes, like he's seeing something beautiful that makes him happy inside. Lillian felt warmth rise in her cheeks at the child's perceptiveness. Your father is a special man. Is it hard that he doesn't talk? Benjamin asked. No, Lillian answered truthfully. He communicates in his own way. Sometimes I think we understand each other better because we have to pay closer attention. Benjamin considered this. Aunt Margaret says Pa might talk again someday if he finds a reason important enough. Do you think that's true? I don't know, Benjamin, but whether he speaks or not doesn't change who he is. The boy nodded, accepting this. I remember his voice a little. It was deep and quiet. He used to sing to me when I was very small. This revelation surprised Lillian. She tried to imagine Silas singing and found the image unexpectedly moving. I bet he had a wonderful voice, she said. He did, Benjamin confirmed. The best. The day before Silas was expected home, Lillian worked with Rosa, now returned from her visit, to prepare a special welcome. They cleaned the house from top to bottom, prepared his favorite foods, and made sure everything was perfect. You care for him, Rosa observed as they worked together in the kitchen. Yes, Lillian admitted, seeing no point in denying what must be obvious. More than I expected to. Rosa nodded approvingly. Good, he deserves happiness, so do you. Our arrangement wasn't supposed to be real, Lillian said hesitantly. Arrangements change, Rosa replied with a knowing smile. Hearts have their own plans. The next day, Benjamin stationed himself on the veranda shortly after breakfast, determined to be the first to spot his father's return. By mid-afternoon, his vigilance was rewarded. They're coming, I see them, he shouted, jumping up and pointing to a cloud of dust on the horizon. Lillian joined him, her heart beating faster at the thought of seeing Silas again. As the riders came into view, she instinctively sought out his tall figure. Benjamin couldn't contain himself. He ran down the steps and across the yard, reaching the returning men before they'd properly arrived. Silas swung down from his horse just in time to catch his son in a fierce hug, lifting the boy off his feet. Lillian remained on the veranda, suddenly shy. When Silas looked up and saw her, something in his expression made her breath catch. Still carrying Benjamin, he walked toward the house, his eyes never leaving hers. He set Benjamin down on the steps and stood before Lillian, trail-worn and dusty but wonderfully, beautifully present. Welcome home, she said softly. He reached for her then, pulling her into an embrace that startled her with its openness. After a moment's surprise, she returned it, feeling the solid strength of him, breathing in the scent of dust and leather and him. When they separated, Benjamin was grinning widely. I knew it. I knew you missed us, Silas smiled, ruffling his son's hair again. He pulled out his slate, writing quickly, more than you know. That evening, after Silas had bathed and changed, after they'd shared the welcome home meal Rosa had prepared, after Benjamin had finally been persuaded to go to bed despite his excitement at his father's return, Lillian and Silas sat alone in the study. The drive went well, she asked. He nodded, writing, good prices, profitable year, I'm glad. The ranch ran smoothly while you were gone. The men were respectful of my instructions. I knew they would be, he wrote. You've earned their respect. A comfortable silence fell between them. Silas seemed to be gathering his thoughts. Finally, he wrote, before I left, I mentioned our arrangement. Yes, Lillian said, her pulse quickening. You said things were changing. He nodded, writing carefully. When Langston sold you to me, I expected a housekeeper, maybe a mother for Benjamin. He paused, then continued, not someone who would matter so much. Silas, Lillian began, but he held up a hand, asking her to let him finish. These weeks away, he wrote, made me realize what I feel for you. It's not gratitude or convenience, it's deeper. He hesitated, then added simply, I love you, Lillian. The words, written in his neat hand, brought tears to her eyes. I love you too, she whispered. I didn't expect to, but I do. He set the slate aside and moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. His eyes asked a question she understood perfectly. Yes, she said. Yes to being your wife in truth, not just in name. Yes to building a life here with you and Benjamin. Yes to everything. He raised one hand to cup her cheek, his touch infinitely gentle. Then, slowly, he leaned forward and kissed her a kiss that held all the words he couldn't say, all the emotion he'd kept contained. When they parted, he reached again for his slate and wrote something that made her heart soar. You are the best thing I never thought to ask for. The seasons turned, bringing changes to the Circle M and its inhabitants. Fall gave way to winter, which in turn yielded to spring, and then to the heat of another summer. Lillian and Silas's relationship deepened and strengthened, their unusual beginning evolving into a partnership that fulfilled them both. They were truly husband and wife now in every sense. Lillian had moved into Silas's room, where they shared the quiet intimacy of married life. Benjamin thrived under their combined care, growing taller and more capable with each passing month. The ranch prospered, Silas's sound management complemented by Lillian's organizational skills and fresh perspectives. Word had come that Lillian's father had died in prison, where he'd been sent after attempting to defraud another businessman after selling Lillian. The news brought a complex mix of emotions: grief for what might have been, relief that the past was truly behind her. Are you all right? Silas had written when he found her sitting alone after receiving the letter. Yes, she'd answered honestly. He stopped being a father to me long ago. You and Benjamin are my family now. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the veranda watching Benjamin play with his dog, a rider appeared at the edge of the property. As he drew closer, Lillian recognized Dr. Lawrence, making one of his regular visits to the outlying ranches. Evening, folks. He called cheerfully as he dismounted. Thought I'd stop by on my rounds. You're always welcome, Doctor, Lillian replied. Would you like some coffee, perhaps something to eat? Coffee would be most appreciated, my dear. The doctor settled into one of the veranda chairs, setting his medical bag beside him. And how is everyone at the Circle M? Young Benjamin looks to have grown another inch since I saw him last. We're all well, Lillian assured him, sending Benjamin to ask Rosa for coffee. The ranch is thriving. Good, good. The doctor turned his attention to Silas. And you, my friend, still maintaining your silence, I see. Silas nodded, his expression neutral. He'd long since grown accustomed to the doctor's direct manner. Pity, Dr. Lawrence remarked, but each man heals in his own way, I suppose. He turned back to Lillian. And how are you feeling, Mrs. Maxwell? Any unusual fatigue or morning sickness? Lillian's eyes widened at the unexpected question. Why would you ask that? The doctor chuckled. My dear, I've delivered nearly every baby in this county for 30 years. I recognize the glow of impending motherhood when I see it. Silas had gone very still beside her. Lillian felt heat rise in her cheeks. I've been feeling a bit tired lately and perhaps a little unsettled in the mornings, but I hadn't thought. How long since your monthly courses? The doctor asked matter-of-factly. Lillian calculated quickly. Almost 7 weeks. Dr. Lawrence nodded, satisfied. As I suspected, congratulations are in order, it seems. Silas reached for Lillian's hand, his eyes questioning. She squeezed his fingers, her own surprise giving way to joy. A baby, she whispered. We're having a baby, the doctor beamed. Indeed you are. If my decades of experience are any indication, I'd say you can expect a new addition to the Maxwell family come early spring. Benjamin returned with the coffee, looking curiously between the adults. What's happened? Why does everyone look so strange? Silas pulled the boy close, writing quickly on his slate. You're going to be a big brother. Benjamin's eyes grew enormous. Really, a baby? When? Where is it? Lillian laughed, her heart overflowing with happiness. The baby is still growing, Benjamin. It won't be here until spring. That's forever, the boy exclaimed dramatically. It will go faster than you think, Dr. Lawrence assured him, accepting the coffee Rosa brought out. And you'll have plenty of time to prepare for your new responsibilities as a big brother. Later, after the doctor had gone and Benjamin had finally been persuaded to go to bed, though he insisted on saying goodnight to the baby first, Lillian and Silas sat close together on the veranda, his arm around her shoulders. Are you happy about the baby? She asked softly. Silas nodded emphatically, his free hand covering hers where it rested on her still, flat stomach. He reached for his slate. More than I can express, even with words if I had them. I never imagined this life, Lillian confessed. When I was put on that stagecoach, sold to a man I'd never met, I thought my life was ending. Instead, it was just beginning. Silas wrote, "Providence brought you here, to us, to me." It did, she agreed, though at the time it felt more like misfortune. He set the slate aside and simply held her, both of them watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding and love. As winter approached, Lillian's condition became more evident. Her dresses needed letting out, and the morning sickness the doctor had mentioned made breakfast a challenging time. Silas was attentive and concerned, often bringing her tea and toast in bed before the queasiness could overwhelm her. Benjamin was fascinated by the whole process, asking endless questions about the baby and how it was growing. Lillian answered as honestly as age-appropriate considerations allowed, touched by the boy's excitement about his future sibling. The first snowfall came in early December, transforming the ranch into a wonderland of white. Benjamin was ecstatic, begging to go sledding on the hill behind the house. Silas fashioned a sturdy sled from wooden boards, and they spent an afternoon in the snow, Lillian watching from the veranda, bundled in blankets at Silas's insistence. That evening, as they sat before the fire in the living room, Benjamin drowsing on the rug with his dog, Silas turned to Lillian with a serious expression. He wrote on his slate, "I've been thinking about names." "For the baby," Lillian asked, "I have two." "If it's a girl," he wrote, "would you consider Helena? After my first wife," the request surprised Lillian, but she understood the sentiment behind it. "I think that would be beautiful. Helena was Benjamin's mother, and this child's brother deserves that connection to her." Silas's eyes showed his gratitude. He wrote, "And if it's a boy?" "What about James?" Lillian suggested. "After my father, not as he was at the end, but as he was when I was small, when he was a good man." Silas nodded, writing, "Helena or James, perfect." As Lillian's pregnancy progressed, the baby's movements became more pronounced. The first time Silas felt the child kick, his expression of wonder made Lillian's heart swell. Benjamin, too, was allowed to feel the baby move, his eyes wide with amazement. "The baby knows me," he declared when a particularly strong kick followed his voice. "We're already friends." With spring approaching, preparations for the baby intensified. Silas converted a small room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, building a cradle with his own hands from wood he'd been seasoning for years. Lillian and Rosa sewed tiny garments and blankets, while Benjamin contributed by painting woodland creatures on the nursery walls with unexpected artistic skill. The first pains came on a mild March evening as Lillian was helping Rosa prepare dinner. She gasped, one hand going to her rounded belly. "Is it time?" Rosa asked, immediately alert. "I think so," Lillian said, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "But it's early yet. The pains are still far apart." Rosa took charge, sending one of the ranch hands for Dr. Lawrence while helping Lillian upstairs to the bedroom. Silas, returning from the barns, was met by Benjamin running to tell him the news. The labor progressed slowly through the night. Dr. Lawrence arrived, his manner reassuring and professional. Silas refused to leave Lillian's side, holding her hand through each contraction, his eyes communicating what his voice could not: encouragement, love, and shared pain. As dawn broke, the pains intensified. "Almost there, Mrs. Maxwell," Dr. Lawrence said. "The baby's head is crowning. One more good push should do it." Lillian gathered her remaining strength, gripping Silas's hand tightly as she pushed. A moment later, a cry filled the room, strong and indignant. "A girl," the doctor announced, lifting the red-faced infant, "and a fine one at that." He placed the baby on Lillian's chest, where she instinctively curled her tiny fingers around her mother's. Tears streamed down Lillian's face as she looked at their daughter. "Helena," she whispered, "welcome to the world, little one." Silas leaned down to kiss Lillian's forehead, his own eyes suspiciously damp. His hand gently touched the baby's dark hair, reverent and tender. After Lillian and the baby had been cleaned up and made comfortable, Benjamin was allowed in to meet his sister. He approached the bed cautiously, his eyes huge as he peered at the tiny bundle in Lillian's arms. "She's so small," he whispered. "Are you sure she's finished?" Lillian laughed softly. "She's perfect, just small. She'll grow quickly, you'll see." "Hello, Helena," Benjamin said seriously. "I'm your big brother. I'm going to teach you everything important, like how to ride a horse and climb trees and find the best fishing spots." Helena yawned in response, which Benjamin took as agreement. "See, she likes me already." Silas sat on the edge of the bed, his family gathered around him. The joy in his eyes was unmistakable as he looked from Benjamin to Helena to Lillian. He reached for his slate, writing words that brought fresh tears to Lillian's eyes. "My heart is too full for silence." Then, to everyone's astonishment, he cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was rough from disuse but clear. "Then hear me say you're safe, all of you, forever." Benjamin's mouth fell open. "Pa, you talked," Silas nodded, his hand finding Lillian's again. "Some things need to be said aloud." Each word seemed to come with effort, but his determination was clear. "I love you, Lillian. I love our children. Thank you for bringing my voice back." Lillian reached up to touch his face, overwhelmed by the gift he'd given them. "I love you too, Silas, so much." As the years passed, the Maxwell family thrived. Helena grew into a spirited girl with her father's gray eyes and her mother's blonde curls. Benjamin became a responsible young man, increasingly taking on ranch duties with pride and competence. Silas spoke more frequently, though he remained a man of few carefully chosen words. His voice, once returned, became a treasured sound in their household, especially when he sang lullabies to Helena, or later, to the son who joined their family 2 years after her birth. Lillian often thought back to that day on the stagecoach when she believed her life was ending. How wrong she had been. Sold to a man who never spoke, she had found not just safety but love, family, and a home that truly belonged to her. On their 10th anniversary, Silas took Lillian riding to the highest point on the ranch property, where they could see the vastness of the Circle M spread before them. The children were with Rosa for the day, giving them a rare moment alone. Happy. Silas asked, his speech now comfortable though still economical. "Completely," Lillian replied, leaning against his shoulder. "You know, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if my father hadn't gambled away everything, if I hadn't been sent to Langston's trading post." "You wouldn't have been sold to a silent man," Silas said wryly, "and I wouldn't have found the love of my life," she countered. "Sometimes the worst beginnings lead to the best endings." Silas pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Not an ending," he murmured, "still just beginning." As they rode back toward the house, their home, Lillian thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. From desperate daughter to reluctant bride to beloved wife and mother. From a woman with no choices to one who chose this life, this man, this family every single day. She had been sold to a man who never spoke, but in his silence, she had found the truest voice of all, the voice of love that needed no words to be understood.